I've had a few titles for this word. Obviously, we're moving on from Advent. We're moving on towards Christmas Day. Goodness gracious me, here we go. Andy, last week, covered the 400 years between Malachi and the Gospels. And we've moved on from them. Now we're further into Advent. In fact, I didn't really know what Advent meant, actually, so I've quickly looked it up. It's not that interesting, so I'll keep it short. It comes from the word meaning coming, the Latin word meaning coming, and the Adventus. And in the 6th century, it was twisted around by the Romans to be about the second coming. Middle Ages came along, now we're not a high point for Christianity, and then it became about the coming of Christ. So basically, it's made up. Okay, moving on. A lot of things we read, we hear about, and we think, oh, that's what God said. They're just things that man made up. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But some things that we have as traditions are just that. They're just made up by some bloke that's older than we are. Or lady. But today, I'm going to talk about Jesus loving the unlovely. That was one of my working titles. And I'm also got another one. Are we spiritual fruits or religious nuts? And I nicked that, to be honest. That wasn't a Terence original. I've pinched it. When I was a kid, I went to a Methodist church with my mum and dad, the one down the road, actually. And somebody, I think it might have been my dad, did it? I don't know. But somebody put on the notice board, it didn't go down very well. Someone put on the notice board, an A4 flyer. There was a picture of some spiritual fruits that were all like happy and yay, and then religious nuts that were grey and downcast. And it said, are you a spiritual fruit or a religious nut? And I think the worthies of that church were a bit offended by that. But we do have to ask ourselves that question. Are we spiritual fruits? Do we bear fruit? Or in actual fact, are we like odd? I don't mean that we shouldn't be odd. We are different to the world. But you know what I mean? Where are we in this? I thought I'd spend a little bit of time this morning talking about how Jesus connected with the people around him. Jesus the man. Luke called him 100% man, 100% God. It's an odd concept, isn't it? But Jesus the man walked on this earth and connected with people around him. What was his driving force? Why did he do what he did? Did he feel? Did he think like we think? If he didn't, if he was some type of Dr. Spock without emotions and feelings, then it's a cheat, isn't it? He didn't go through what we went through if he didn't go through what we go through. So Jesus did feel. Jesus was a man of emotion. Overwhelmingly, of course, the emotion that Jesus felt was love. And the Bible mentions several types of love. Phileo and agape are probably the better known ones. And phileo originates from the Greek word philos, which means beloved or dear and prized in a personal, intimate way. Perhaps the best or an obvious scripture to mention that is, by this shall everyone know that you are my disciples if you love one another. And then there's agape love, which is a higher form of love, a divine love, immeasurable love, the sort of love that God has for us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes on him shall not perish but have everlasting life. So those are sort of two examples of that. And the central theme of Christianity, thank God, literally, is love. And we are entering that time of year where all sorts of people talk about love. It's Christmas. And Jesus, what caused Jesus to come to this world was love. That's why Jesus came to earth as a baby and allowed himself to be captivated in this baby and then grow up in this unpleasant small world that he allowed himself to be part of. And it was love that did that. It was love that took him through his ministry. It was love that took him to the cross. And most importantly, it wasn't nails that kept him to the cross. It was love that held him on the cross. He could have got off any time he wanted. It was love that held him there. And the Gospels are littered with stories of Jesus loving the unlovely. I mean, you can't pick the Bible up without seeing it. And I want to read one, which is a story which Jesus told to illustrate love in action. And I'm going to hopefully just take a little bit of a different angle on it. It's a Good Samaritan. There's certain stories in the Bible that I think, they make me smile, really, because I've got a few friends that are non-believers, atheists, whatever, but they will quote the Bible sometimes without knowing it's the Bible. They will do. The Good Samaritan is one of them. So they might talk about the Good Samaritan without actually realizing that it's a Jesus story. I like that sort of thing. It sort of tickles me. But anyway, I'm like, Jesus said that, don't you? No, he didn't. So look it up. So, Luke 10, 30 to 37. This is obviously a story that we know really, really well. Luke 10, 30 to 37. And it says this. In reply, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes. They beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, pass by on the other side. But a Samaritan. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Jews and Samaritans were not didn't quite get on. They hated each other. The Jews in particular thought they were far superior to the Samaritans. And in actual fact, this is a very offensive thing for Jesus to say. I mean, Jesus made he did try to be as offensive as he could on a lot of occasions. But this was one of them. A Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in their law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. There is a large amount of directions you can go with a story like the Good Samaritan. Luke spoke, as I said, of Jesus being 100% man. So he would have told this story knowing, I do think that Jesus just threw hand grenades in all over the place. I think that's what he did. And he would have known that this was an offensive story to everybody that heard it. Because I'll guarantee the only person that liked this story would have been the Samaritan, and he wouldn't have been there. Everybody else didn't like this story. The religious leaders didn't like it because it was basically saying, you're not doing what you should be doing. The Jews wouldn't have liked it because it said, you're arch enemy, the Samaritan. They sorted it all out. Nobody liked this story. And Jesus did that sort of stuff all the time. Because he was 100% man, he had emotion. He was an emotional being. There's evidence of this. I did this last time, didn't I? Making a noise. Do you think it's me? I think it's because I did have a shave this morning, but I've got such a manly stubble. I think. I'm no James Jenkinson, but I try my best. Hello. Right. Hello there. First of all, Jesus got tired. Over and again we speak about Jesus. The Bible talks about him leaving the crowds to rest. He just needed a break, I'd had enough. He knew anger. Obviously, there's quite a few scriptures that describe this, but the best known one is the turning over the money changers, where he's just irritated and angry at what's going on in God's house. He knew sadness and sorrow. Jesus wept several times, but of course, most famously, at the Tomb of Lazarus. He knew compassion for the crowds. He knew compassion for the lost and the downtrodden. He knew frustration. Goodness me, hanging out with the disciples for 3 years would have done that to anybody. I take, reassurance when I see that. I mean, I've never physically met God. And yet these guys were with him for 3 years. And he was frustrated with them at their unbelief all the time. He knew agony, anxiety, and stress. A lot of people nowadays would reconcile with that, would understand that. Agony and stress and anxiety, that sick feeling in your stomach. Most famously in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he weeps. Sorry, he sweats blood because he's so stressed. He's so uptight. He's so scared, possibly. But he knew what had to be done. Not my will, but yours, Lord. But you know, overwhelmingly, the emotion that God felt was love. Because he didn't have to go through any of those other emotions. He was God. But he allowed himself to become 100% man. Now, what Jesus really did at the time, specifically, was he spent a lot of time loving those that might have been considered at that time unlovely. I mean, he really targeted them. I mean, Jesus loved everybody. And he was compassionate enough to spend time with Nicodemus, who was a religious person, in dark, because he knew that Nicodemus was scared. So he loved everybody where they were. But he really, I think, had a special place for sinners. I think he really liked them. First and foremost, hung out with sinners. He was called a friend of sinners. And Luke sort of threw out there the other day that perhaps that Son of Man might have been one of Jesus' favourite titles, and perhaps it is. But you know what? I bet he loved being called a friend of sinners. I bet he was like fist pump in the air. Wow, that is it. I can imagine him saying to the disciples, yes, I am a friend of sinners, and don't you forget it. I bet he loved that title. The title when people were saying, look at him, with tax collectors and sinners. And the people that were saying it to insult Jesus. That was the whole point. But he completely would have thought, yes, I am. That's exactly what I am. So some examples of that. Well, tax collectors. You know, it's a different thing now than it was then. I mean, nobody likes paying taxes, I suppose, but it's a necessary evil and it keeps the world moving around in a circle and all the rest of it. But back then it was a different ballgame altogether. People hated tax collectors. You know, this was an occupied land. So this was like during World War II when if you were a French person living in France and you sidled with the Germans, people around you would have hated you. It's like that, only multiplied hundreds of times because it went over centuries. And tax collectors sidled with the Romans. They were like sort of baby Romans, really. Unclean, dirty, not dirty physically, but dirty in the sin that they carried around with them. Everyone knew that about tax collectors. And they took extra money to line their own pockets. They were all wealthy. And at that time, people were not wealthy. So there were wealthy people that sidled with Romans and basically lived a very, very ungodly life. Jesus befriended him. He had one in his gang. We walked down the street one day and said, Zacchaeus, a different one. Zacchaeus, come down. I'm going to come to your house for tea. And I bet everyone said, does he know that Zacchaeus is a tax collector? Do they know the sort of parties that Zacchaeus has? These won't be like, tea and cakes. It'd be a very different type of event. Very, very different. They were mini Romans. They would have been Roman type events. Jesus went into nasty environments, dealt with it. He touched people that were unclean. He connected with people that were bad, for want of a better expression. Tax collectors would have been one of those type of people, big time. Lepers. Now, we don't hear as much about leprosy nowadays. It's not the disease it was because of sanitation and vaccines and all that type of thing. But back then, being a leper was a death sentence. And literally, lepers were kept outside. They would ring a bell and shout unclean, all that. A leper was devalued. They were unwelcome in society, regarded as an unholy person. Jesus coped with that. He healed them. He connected with them. He touched them. Jesus connected with people with dubious morals. It's a family show, so I'm not going into this too much detail. But back in World War II, there was a thing called LMF, lack of moral fibre. And if you, particularly in the RAF, if you did not fight like you should have fought, then when you came out of the RAF, when you were demobbed, they put LMF on your documents. It said you lacked moral fibre. And Jesus hung out with people that lacked moral. That was very unfair, by the way, back then. I'm just making that clear. But nevertheless, Jesus hung out with people that lacked moral fibre, prostitutes, people like that. In fact, I'm not in any way judging them. That's the opposite of what I'm doing. But Jesus hung out with them deliberately. He knew. He absolutely knew these people that went to tax collectors' parties. But that's where he wanted to be. There was an event that's told in Luke 7, and Jesus is at a religious person's house, a Pharisee, and a prostitute comes in and she wets Jesus' feet with her tears and wipes them with her hair. And everybody knew what she was. And I can imagine them thinking, what's he going to do here then? How's he going to handle this? He didn't pull away. He allowed her to touch him. He allowed her to make him ceremonially unclean because he loved her. And he recognized one very, very important thing, that her touching him does not make him unclean. It's what's inside that makes us unclean. It's not the things that we touch and the life that people see that we do. It's what's inside. But obviously the religiosity of the time was all about the actions that people did. It was all about that. But Jesus got it. He'd written the book. And he completely got it, that what actually mattered was what's inside a person coming out, not what's outside a person coming in. The unlikely people that he also defended were the Romans. Now, you don't see quite so much of this, but he didn't hang out with them, but he nevertheless healed a centurion servant. He spoke to a Roman. But also, the Romans, they've got little rules. I mean, these were tyrants. They were very bad people. And they'd been occupying that land for a very long time. So there were various rules that had come along. For example, if somebody asked you to carry, if a Roman asked a Jew to carry their bag, they've got to carry it a mile. That's one of the odd rules that was at the time. So again, one of those other things that when I hear a non-Christian friend of mine or an atheist who would be negative about the Bible say, well, I went the extra mile. I'm like, well, that came from Jesus as well, actually. So on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is talking about exactly this. He uses this as an example, and he says to the Jews that are there, if somebody asks you to carry the pack, carry an extra mile. They would have understood that what he was saying to them was, reach out to the Romans. Love them. And that would have been a very strong word at the time. Over and over again, Jesus looked out for the unloved, the unclean, and he reached out to them consistently. And that's exactly how he reaches out to us. The important thing for us in this world is that we realize that the distinction that Jesus is making there is that we are all the same. We are all the same. We're not better, no worse than anybody else. We are all the same. We are all sinners. I want to tell that story of the Good Samaritan in a slightly different way. Now, I can't make it as offensive as Jesus did because A, I don't want to. And B, I just can't. You can't make that happen in today's society. But I'll tell it a different way. So there's a chap, right, and he's walking from Handsworth to Swallownest. And while he's walking down there, he gets attacked, he gets beaten, stabbed and robbed. And he's left. He's dying. He looks up. He's pleased because he can see the leaders of Grace Church walking down towards him. So it's Luke and Leah and Andy and Terence who are walking down. And they're walking their dogs, which bizarrely are all beginning by the name of B, actually. Maybe to be a leader at our church, you've got to have a dog beginning by B. We've got Bernie, we've got Bear, and now I've got a dog called Bella. So maybe it just comes with the territory, I don't know. I might change his name to Carl. Anyway, so he looks up and he's like, oh, saved. So one of these four says, I won't tell you which one, says, I don't think he's seen us. I think we get away with this. Another one says, I'm not telling you which one, says that, you know what, look at him, he's a right mess. I just don't want to get involved. Another one says, he's bleeding all over. Look at him, he's in the right state. I don't want him in my car, he's bleeding all over the place. That could have been me. You got there before me. And we walk on by. And then after us, another Christian church come past. And they did the same thing. But then after us, the leader of the Hakor come past, which is Handsworth Atheist against Christians and organised religion. Everybody knows that. So the leader of the Handsworth Atheists comes past with his unlikely friend, the local imam from the local mosque. And these guys walk past. And they say, we can't leave this fella. Look at this. So they put him in his car. They take him somewhere. They don't just patch him up. They stay with him all night to heal him and do the best for him. The following morning, they leave money with the hostel that they're in. And they'll say, we'll come back in a week and we'll sort him out. The unlikeliest of people help people out. You know, we need to recognize, and this is not a judgmental thing, it's the opposite, but our righteousness is like filthy rags. It really is. That's the reality of it. You might be like one tiny scurrick more righteous than the guy by the side of you. It's irrelevant. The best way I can describe it is this. The richest person listening to this compared to the poorest person listening to this, there might be quite a bit of money difference in those two people. I don't know, 100 grand, 200 grand, who knows? Bring Bill Gates into the room, who's a multi-billionaire, and the comparison with these two is irrelevant. That's how our righteousness looks to God. When we compare ourselves to someone that we think we are better than, our righteousness is like filthy rags. It's an irrelevance. Because we can never reach the standard anyway. And you know what? Neither can they. We're no better than the worst sinner. And that's not to judge us. We have Jesus' blood covering us. So we are clean. But our job is not to judge someone that isn't. So the second thing I'd like to learn from this is cautionary, really. Let's look for the spirit of the religious leaders among me. You know, always actually, when I prepare something, I tend to, I don't deliberately, how does this apply to me in some godly way? He just does. He always does. And you know what? This is me all over. And how does it apply to me? How religious am I? You know, Jesus goaded the religious leaders. He loved to take them out. He deliberately picked at them. Let's not be like that. And let's look for that inside me, not in somebody else. Obviously, that's the whole point. But let's examine my own heart and say, Lord, am I like that? Let's look for number 3. Let's look. Actually, I want the band to come up now, actually. Sorry, should have said it earlier. Lesson number 3, let's look for opportunities to demonstrate God's love. This is a time of year when people do that sort of thing. Atheists do that sort of thing at this time of year because it's Christmas. We should be at the front of that queue. It's pretty rare you'll hear me encourage you to give money for stuff. But you know that Christmas appeal? If you give £1, if that's all you've got, £1, give it to that. That will mean something to you as much as it will to them. Everyone's got £1. So give it to that. Let's make a difference, an actual physical difference in the lives of people around us. Let's be the salt that savors, rather than people looking in and saying, well, God loves you. Let's make it a practical thing. And lastly, let's make this an all year round pledge. We are salt that savors all year round, not just at Christmas. And I know that at Christmas is times when people are thinking about this type of thing. So let's obviously buy into that. Let's allow that to be the case. But let's make a difference all year round to the people that we are living next to, that we rub shoulders with, that we have connections with. And overall, let's make sure that we're spiritual fruits, not religious nuts. That's me. Have a great Christmas, everybody.